Have you ever had to say goodbye to someone who meant the world to you? Someone who, no matter the distance or time apart, would always hold a special place in your heart? This is the story of Lee Sang-hyun and his friend, a friendship that had spanned years, full of memories and moments shared. But now, that friendship was about to be tested by distance, as his friend was preparing to leave the country, leaving Lee Sang-hyun to face a future without the person who had been by his side through thick and thin. The day of departure had come faster than either of them had expected. They had spent countless hours talking, reminiscing, and making plans for the future, but the reality of the situation had started to sink in. Lee Sang-hyun had always known that one day his friend might leave, but the thought of it never truly hit him until now. How could he let go of the person who had been there through so many challenges, the one person who truly understood him? The two of them sat in a small cafe near the airport, their conversation flowing easily, as it always did. But today, there was a tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that their time together was running out. The reality of the situation hung over them like a cloud, and though they both tried to avoid talking about it, it was impossible to ignore. "Are you ready for this?" Lee Sang-hyun asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. His friend, who had been staring out the window, turned to look at him with a sad smile. "I don't think you're ever really ready to leave. But I have to go. I have my reasons." Lee Sang-hyun nodded, though a part of him didn't want to accept the truth. He had always known that his friend had big dreams, dreams that were bigger than their small world, but the thought of him leaving still felt impossible. "I understand," Lee Sang-hyun said, his voice faltering. "But it's going to be different without you. Things won't be the same." "Nothing ever stays the same," his friend replied softly. "But that doesn't mean it has to end. We'll make new memories, even if we're far apart." The words stung, but they also brought a sense of comfort. Lee Sang-hyun knew that his friend was right. Life was about change, and sometimes, that change meant letting go of the things you loved most. But letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the memories with you, cherishing them for what they were, and continuing to move forward. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them lost in their thoughts, trying to come to terms with the inevitable. Lee Sang-hyun couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was it. The moment when everything changed. The moment when he would have to say goodbye to his best friend, the one person who had always been there for him, no matter what. His friend reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "You'll be fine," he said gently. "You always have been." Lee Sang-hyun looked up at him, his eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know what I'll do without you." "You'll figure it out," his friend replied, his smile soft but reassuring. "You've always been strong. And I know that no matter where I am, you'll always be a part of my life." The words were comforting, but they didn't stop the ache in Lee Sang-hyun's chest. He wasn't ready to say goodbye, but he knew that it was a part of life, a part of growing, of moving forward, and of embracing the change that came with it. The time was quickly approaching. The moment when they would have to part ways for what could be years. And as Lee Sang-hyun sat there, he realized that this was a chance to make the most of the time they had left. He couldn't let the sadness take over. He needed to embrace this moment for what it was, a beautiful chapter in their story, one that had come to an end, but one that would live on in their hearts. The airport loomed in the distance as the final moments of their time together approached. Lee Sang-hyun and his friend walked side by side through the bustling crowd, neither of them speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what was about to happen was almost too much to bear, but they kept walking, one step after another, as if putting one foot in front of the other could somehow delay the inevitable. As they reached the terminal, the reality of the situation hit Lee Sang-hyun all over again. His friend's departure wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the closing of a book that had been written with laughter, with shared secrets, and with an unspoken bond that had stood the test of time. There was a lump in his throat that he couldn't swallow, a feeling of emptiness that he couldn't shake. His friend stopped and turned to him, their eyes meeting for the first time since they had started walking toward the gate. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice soft, as if the weight of the words was too much for him to bear. Lee Sang-hyun took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "I think we both know that words can't really express how much this hurts. But I also know that this isn't the end." It's just a new beginning. For both of us. His friend nodded, though the sadness in his eyes remained. I'll miss you, more than you'll ever know. The words hit Lee Sang-heon harder than he expected, but he forced a smile. I'll miss you too. But I'll be here. We'll always find a way to stay in touch, even if it's just through memories. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, the noise of the airport fading into the background as they both took in the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a goodbye, it was a recognition that life was moving forward, and that they both had to continue on their separate paths, no matter how painful it was. Lee Sang-heon extended his hand, and his friend took it without hesitation, shaking it firmly. Take care of yourself, Lee Sang-heon said, his voice thick with emotion. And don't forget, no matter where you go, you'll always have a home here. His friend looked at him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I won't forget. I promise. And then, in that quiet, poignant moment, they shared a final hug. It wasn't long, but it was enough. It was everything. Lee Sang-heon held on tight, as if the embrace could somehow make time stand still, as if it could somehow freeze this moment in place so they wouldn't have to say goodbye. I'll never forget this, his friend whispered in his ear. You've always been my brother, Lee Sang-heon. Always. As they pulled away, Lee Sang-heon wiped his eyes, trying to mask the tears that had threatened to fall. Go and chase your dreams, he said with a smile. And remember, I'll be cheering for you every step of the way. With one last glance, his friend turned and began to walk toward the gate. Lee Sang-heon stood there, watching him go, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep into his bones. He had always known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier. As his friend disappeared into the crowd, Lee Sang-heon took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The goodbye was hard, yes. But it wasn't the end. They would find a way to stay connected, to keep their bond alive, no matter the distance. Take care, Lee Sang-heon whispered to the air, his heart heavy but full of love. I'll see you again. Lee Sang-heon stood alone in the bustling airport, the sounds of announcements and footsteps echoing around him, but his mind was far from the noise. His friend was gone. The man who had shared so much of his life, who had been his partner in crime through thick and thin, was now thousands of miles away. The reality of it felt surreal, as if he would turn around and find his friend waiting, ready to continue their adventures. But no matter how hard he tried to convince himself, the truth remained, the goodbye had happened. And it was final. He didn't know how long he stood there, lost in his thoughts, but eventually, he forced himself to move. The world didn't stop just because his heart ached. People around him continued with their lives, their movements fluid and purposeful. But for Lee Sang-heon, it felt like time had slowed, like he was still processing the enormity of the change that had just taken place. With a heavy heart, he walked out of the airport, the cool evening air hitting his face as he stepped into the street. The world outside was bright, alive, full of energy, but inside, Lee Sang-heon felt a quiet emptiness. His friend's absence echoed louder with each passing second. But in the midst of the silence, something stirred inside him, a reminder of the promise he had made, to both himself and his friend, to keep moving forward. His friend had left to chase his dreams, to explore new horizons, and Lee Sang-heon knew deep down that he had to do the same. This wasn't the end. It was simply a new chapter. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the messages from other friends, people who had reached out to him, offering support, knowing how difficult this moment would be for him. One message caught his eye, from a friend who had always been there for him in the past. You're stronger than you think. And you're never truly alone. Don't forget that. Lee Sang-heon smiled softly. His friend was right. He was stronger than he realized. And though the sadness from the farewell was heavy, it was also a reminder of just how much he had been loved, and how much love he had to give in return. The emptiness wasn't a void, it was a space ready to be filled with new experiences, new memories, and new connections. Walking through the city, Lee Sang-heon's mind wandered to all the people who had impacted his life in one way or another. He thought of his family, his friends, and even the strangers he had crossed paths with, each of them leaving a small imprint on his heart. No one's presence was permanent, but their impact could be eternal. It was in these quiet moments of reflection that Lee Sang-heon realized the importance of living fully. Life was a series of goodbyes and hellos, of comings and goings, but the one thing that remained constant was the love we shared with one another, the connections we made, and the memories we carried. As he sat down at a cafe, ordering a coffee to help clear his mind, he thought about the times his friend had laughed with him over the smallest things, the adventures they had shared, the struggles they had overcome together. Every memory, every moment, was now etched in his heart. And though they wouldn't see each other for a while, Lee Sang-hyun knew that their bond would never break, no matter the distance. He pulled out his notebook and began to write. He wrote about the goodbye, about the pain he felt, but also about the hope he had for the future. He wrote about how this farewell wasn't the end, it was simply another part of the journey, another chapter in the story that they had started together. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the city, Lee Sang-hyun put the pen down, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't quite sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to embrace it. There were still so many adventures to be had, so many people to meet, and so much love to give. And as for his friend? He knew that their paths would cross again, somewhere down the road. The distance may be great, but true friendship could never be severed. The world had changed, but Lee Sang-hyun's heart was still full of love, of memories, and of the promise to live, to continue moving forward, no matter the distance. As the days went on, Lee Sang-hyun found himself navigating the changes in his life with a quiet determination. The absence of his friend was a constant presence, but he was learning to adapt, to find new rhythms, and to fill his days with meaning, even in the face of the grief and loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed him. He continued his work, reconnected with family, and spent time with friends who had always been there for him, but deep down, he knew something was missing. He started taking more walks, exploring parts of the city he hadn't really noticed before. The city, in its constant motion, was both a reminder of the fast-paced life he was living and a source of comfort in its familiarity. Yet, it also made him realize how much he had grown over the years, how much his life had been shaped by his relationships, and how important it was to continue making meaningful connections, even when things seemed uncertain. One evening, as he walked past a park, he saw a familiar face sitting on a bench. It was Jean, a friend he hadn't seen in months. Jean was someone who had also experienced the hardships of loss, having lost a loved one years ago. Their friendship had been built on shared pain, but also on the strength they had found together in those moments. Lee Sang-hyun smiled as he approached, and Jean looked up, surprised but clearly pleased to see him. "Lee Sang-hyun, it's been too long." Jean greeted him warmly, standing up to give him a hug. "Too long indeed," Lee Sang-hyun said with a smile, feeling a warmth spread through him as they embraced. They sat on the bench together, catching up on life, talking about the ups and downs that had happened since they last met. But as they spoke, Lee Sang-hyun couldn't help but notice that Jean seemed different. There was a lightness to him, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. His face wasn't weighed down by the burden of grief the way it had been before. "You seem different," Lee Sang-hyun remarked, a curious smile on his face. "What's changed?" Jean paused for a moment, considering the question, and then he spoke with an ease Lee Sang-hyun hadn't heard in a long time. "You know, it's been a journey, but I've finally started to accept that I can't control everything. I can't control when people leave or why they leave. But I can control how I live, how I carry their memory, and how I choose to keep moving forward. And that's what I've been focusing on. It's not about moving on, it's about learning to live with it. To honor what was, while still embracing what is to come." Lee Sang-hyun listened closely, and for the first time in a while, he realized how much Jean had healed. There was no magic fix, no overnight solution. It had taken time, but Jean had found his peace in the most difficult of circumstances. And Lee Sang-hyun, though still carrying the weight of his own loss, felt inspired by his friend's resilience. "You've got it," Lee Sang-hyun said softly, a feeling of understanding growing within him. "That's exactly what I need to remember. It's not about forgetting or replacing what was. It's about living fully, embracing everything that's ahead, even when we don't have all the answers." Jean nodded, his gaze softening. "It's the best way to honor the people we've lost, don't you think? By not letting the sadness define us. By living for both of us, for them and for us." Lee Sang-hyun smiled, feeling a renewed sense of clarity. "I think you're right. It's time for me to really start living that way." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying the peaceful moment, the city bustling around them. It wasn't just the city that was moving. Lee Sang-heon felt a shift inside himself, a growing sense of readiness for whatever the future might bring. It was a reminder that while the past shaped them, it didn't have to hold them back. The future was full of possibilities, and as long as he kept his heart open, he would be ready to embrace them. Before they parted ways that evening, Jean gave Lee Sang-heon a firm handshake and a smile. "Take care, my friend. Don't forget to live for yourself, too." Lee Sang-heon nodded, feeling the weight of his friend's words. "I won't forget." "Thank you, Jean." As he walked away, Lee Sang-heon felt a quiet strength settling over him. It wasn't just the memory of his friend that he carried with him now, it was the lessons he had learned, the courage to keep moving forward, and the understanding that the best way to honor someone's legacy was to live a life full of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but Lee Sang-heon was no longer afraid. He would take the love he had for his friend and use it to fuel his own journey. Life would always have its challenges, its goodbyes, and its heartaches. But in the end, it was the way we chose to live in the face of those moments that mattered most. Lee Sang-heon continued his journey, one step at a time, still carrying the weight of his friend's departure, but finding peace in the lessons that loss had taught him. He started to reconnect with people he hadn't seen in a while, building a network of support around him, one that encouraged him to keep moving forward. Each interaction, each moment of shared understanding, was a small reminder that life was still worth living, and that the connections we make with others are the threads that hold us together. One day, as he sat with his family at dinner, Lee Sang-heon couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed since his friend's departure. The feeling of emptiness that had initially engulfed him was slowly giving way to a sense of fulfillment. He had realized that he didn't have to be defined by his loss, he could find strength in it, and in doing so, he could honor his friend's memory. His mother, who had been silently watching him for a while, broke the quiet, noticing the change in him. "You're different, Sang-heon," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "You've grown." Lee Sang-heon looked up from his plate, surprised by the observation. "What do you mean?" "You've always been strong, but now there's a new calm in you. I can see it in the way you carry yourself, in the way you talk about your friend. You've made peace with it, haven't you?" Lee Sang-heon smiled, his heart swelling with appreciation for his mother's insight. "I think I have. It's been a long road, but I've realized something: loss doesn't have to break us. It can shape us, help us grow. And that's what I'm doing. I'm growing." His mother nodded, her eyes glistening with pride. "I'm so proud of you, Sang-heon. You've always had such a big heart, and now, you're learning to love yourself just as much as you love others." Her words brought a flood of emotions, and for the first time in months, Lee Sang-heon felt the weight of his grief start to lift. He wasn't moving on, as many people might have told him to do. He was simply learning how to carry the love he had for his friend, and using it as a source of strength to move forward with purpose. That night, as he lay in bed, his thoughts drifted back to the promises he had made, to live for both himself and his friend, to embrace the future even when it seemed uncertain. The journey wasn't over, and he knew there would still be moments of doubt, of sadness, but he had come so far, and he was stronger than he realized. He knew his friend's memory would stay with him forever. And though they were separated by distance, the love they had shared could never be taken away. It was a part of him now, woven into the very fabric of his life. Lee Sang-heon closed his eyes, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. Tomorrow would be another day, another opportunity to live fully, to keep moving forward, and to keep honoring the friendship that had meant so much to him. And as he drifted off to sleep, he whispered into the quiet of the room, "Thank you." He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it, knowing that the love he carried in his heart would guide him every step of the way. The following weeks passed with Lee Sang-heon finding himself in a constant process of adaptation. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed by the absence of his friend, and he would find himself pausing in the middle of the street, wishing he could reach out and share something with him. But then, just as quickly, he would remind himself that it wasn't just the goodbyes that defined their friendship. It was the memories, the moments they had shared, and the knowledge that, even though they were apart, their connection would always remain. One afternoon, Lee Sang-heon walked to the park where he and his friend had spent so many hours, talking about life, their dreams, and the future. It was a familiar place that now carried the weight of their parting, but also the joy of the time they had spent there. As he sat on the bench, Lee Sang-heon closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to reflect on everything he had learned over the past months. The pain, the healing, the growth, it had all shaped him into someone who was ready to face the challenges that life had in store. Just then, his phone buzzed, and he picked it up to find a message from his friend. He smiled as he read the words, the simple "How are you doing? Miss you, buddy." It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that even though they were in different parts of the world, their bond was as strong as ever. Lee Sang-heon quickly typed back, "I'm good. I miss you too. I'll keep moving forward, just like we promised." He pressed send and leaned back against the bench, the breeze gently rustling the leaves above him. It was a small moment, but it was enough to bring him a sense of peace. The distance between them didn't lessen their connection, in fact, it made it clearer. They had both chosen to live, to continue their journeys, knowing that their friendship would be a constant source of strength, no matter where they were. As he stood up to leave the park, Lee Sang-heon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had honored his friend by embracing life, by continuing to chase his own dreams, and by carrying the lessons he had learned into the future. He had come to understand that love didn't always mean proximity. Sometimes, it meant letting go, allowing people to grow, and knowing that the bond you shared would never fade. Life had a way of throwing challenges at you when you least expected it, but Lee Sang-heon now knew that he had the strength to face them. He wasn't alone. He had his memories, his friends, and the love that had shaped him into who he was. And, most importantly, he had the promise he had made to live fully, no matter where life took him. As he walked away from the park, Lee Sang-heon smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude for the journey he had been on, and the one that was still unfolding. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for it. If you've made it this far, type "journey" in the comments.